when I was at Craven, when I was there in my latter years, and there was an executive vice president who came to join us from Oklahoma. Her name was Cindy Hess. And Cindy then went back to and became an executive VP at Tulsa Community College. Cindy was funny, and we would often tease each other and play pranks on each other, and enjoyed kind of doing that sometimes. And the faculty and staff knew that. But one time, something that happened at Craven was actually my next door neighbor was involved with several women, and primarily women in the community, who started taking welding classes and it was primarily for art. They were taking welding to do art. And the art instructor, I can't remember her name now, came to me later and said, what would you think about having public art on campus? So now you have the big donations, art's a whole different thing. Catherine Chu took that to a whole new level. But back then it was about student public art. And so I said, that's great. I think that's a great idea. Let's give it a shot. And so what happened was, their first effort was to make these eggs and put them in a nest, this big nest. And it was right in the middle, where the woods separate the parking lot and everybody walks through. And it was there. And one day, one of those eggs was gone. I think there were 3 of these eggs. And it was close to Easter. And we didn't get a whole lot of publicity for things. So I remember our director of public information, Sandy had this idea, well, we'll let people know about it. And it got into the newspaper about around Easter time, the great egg caper, different kinds of things that were going on. And so what happened was it was a couple of weeks later, and our students were having an art show downtown. It was called the Bank of the Arts. And at that time, New Bern, I don't know if they still do, but at that time they had a big juried outdoor sculpture show in a vacant lot that was in downtown New Bern, and we were having the student show, and Cindy and her husband Frank and my wife Lisa and I had decided to go to dinner afterwards downtown, and we were leaving, and pretty late, it was later for downtown, the streets were kind of rolling up at that time, and I looked over at that statue and saw this bird. It was this chrome osprey. It was very tall, and I remember looking at Cindy and said, what would look good under that bird is an egg. And Cindy kind of looked at me, and we got in I was driving a little truck at that time and drove back to Craven Community College. And I put that other egg in the back of my truck, and we snuck back downtown, parked, and I was looking around, make sure nobody was there. And I took this egg out, which is not that heavy, but it's big, and dropped it right under that bird, and we took off. And the next day, my sons were little, I was coaching basketball, and Cindy called me, acting all uptight, saying, we shouldn't have done that. We could get fired for this. We shouldn't have done that. I didn't know if she was pranking me or not. And she said, well, Frank and I went back and we got that egg and we took it back because we just, we could get so much trouble for that. I kind of thought she might be pranking me, but I wasn't sure. So after the basketball game, I decided to go downtown. I used to like running around downtown, and ran by and saw that the egg was still there. She was just pulling my leg. But then I noticed there were 2 students who I recognized, who must have been walking around, and they had found the egg, and so you looked excited. So I ran a little faster, got back to my truck, and was driving back out, and then I decided to go back by it again. And by the time I got there, the police were there. And the siren, I don't think they had sirens, but the police, I could tell, New Bern police were there talking to the students. They had found the stolen egg, the lost egg, assumed. By the time I got home that evening, it was actually my next door neighbor, Becky Badger, who was one of these folks, and it was her egg, and she was on the phone with my wife, and everybody was at Twitter that they had found the egg that had been stolen a couple of weeks earlier, and that was on the news that night. They had found the egg. It was all this whole carry on of that, not knowing that it was the other egg. And then, a couple of days later, it became the other egg that was, taken, and there's actually it was in the newspaper. I still have that newspaper. So I never told anybody about that. There's only a few people, because until I was leaving town, I did tell Becky Badger, hey, we were the ones who took that egg and put it under the bird, because eventually they realized it was not the first egg, it was the second egg that was stolen. So that was a little story I kept to myself that last year before I left. Because what happened was Becky, before I told her, it was actually about the time we were moving. We were next door neighbors. Before we were moving, she decided, I'm not going to leave that egg at the college anymore. Somebody else will take it, not knowing I was the one who took it. And she went and put it right beside her front door, which was, 10 feet away from me. Every time I'd walk out my door and I'd see it. So Cindy and I had a next plan. We were going to, the next Easter came along, we're going to take that egg again and take it back down there and just drop Easter eggs around it and see if folks, but we chickened out that time. I kind of regret that we chickened out, but that was going to be our final. I know Becky kept it at her house, and so there was only like one egg in that big nest left, so I think the chances are very low that it's anywhere around. But I do have that newspaper somewhere. I did take that, and I was going to frame it just to, so I do have that Sun Journal newspaper that they reported that it was the second egg that was found.